Segment 1, Junior Seau, the warrior who couldn't turn it off. He was the heartbeat of the Chargers, a linebacker who defined an era, ferocious, disciplined, and impossible to break. For 2 decades, Junior Seau was football's prototype of toughness. 12 Pro Bowls, NFL Defensive Player of the Year, a legend in San Diego long before his Hall of Fame plaque. He played through torn muscles, broken bones, and concussions that would have ended most careers. And he smiled through everyone, because pain was part of his job. And for Seau, pain was proof of purpose. But when the pads came off, something was missing. Silence. No roaring crowd, no sideline chaos, no violence to release what he felt inside. The man who lived for collisions was left alone with the echoes of them. After retirement in 2010, the cracks began to show. He couldn't sleep. He withdrew from friends. He once drove his SUV off a cliff in California. Said he fell asleep at the wheel.
Authorities in California are investigating a crash involving former NFL star Junior Seau.
Those close to him knew it wasn't fatigue. It was something darker. Mood swings, forgetfulness, paranoia. The symptoms of a mind under siege. Junior Seau's brain was being eaten alive by CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy. The same disease the NFL once denied even existed. The same disease caused by years of subconcussive hits. Not the big knockouts, but the little ones that come every single play. On May 2nd, 2012, Junior Seau took his own life with a gunshot to the chest.
Seau's suicide has been sending shockwaves throughout the community.
Crowds were huge outside Junior Seau's Oceanside home.
He left no note. He left no answers. Just questions the NFL couldn't ignore anymore. His family donated his brain for study, and the results were undeniable. CTE advanced, irreversible. That discovery changed everything. It fueled lawsuits, medical reform, helmet redesigns, and concussion protocols. But for all the policy that came after, the truth was simpler and far more painful. Junior Seau's death wasn't about football injuries. It was about what happens when your entire identity is built on being indestructible. And then, one day, you're not. He spent his life protecting others, leading, inspiring, taking the hits so others didn't have to. But when he needed protection, there was none. He gave the game everything. And when the game was done with him, all he had left was the silence. Junior Seau didn't die from one hit. He died from all of them. Segment 2, Ricky Williams, the man who quit for peace. At his peak, Ricky Williams was unstoppable. A Heisman Trophy winner, a first-round pick, and the foundation of the Miami Dolphins offense. He was built to carry a franchise, and for a while he did.
Williams to the outside, to the pylon, touchdown, Miami.
But behind the mask, the smile, and the noise, Ricky Williams was suffocating. He never fit the league's image of a star. He wasn't loud. He wasn't confrontational. He didn't chase attention. He avoided it. To most, that made him strange. To the NFL, that made him a problem. The media mocked him for doing interviews with his helmet on. They called him awkward, antisocial, disconnected. But the truth was far simpler. He had crippling social anxiety, and no one in football knew how to deal with that. The league rewarded aggression, not introspection. It built warriors, not thinkers. And Ricky was a thinker trapped inside a machine that punished softness like sin. In 2004, he walked away from everything. Fame, endorsements, millions in guaranteed money, and vanished. No farewell tour, no speech, just silence. To most of the country, he was a quitter. To those who understood, he was a man trying to survive his own mind. He spent those years searching for peace, studying meditation, philosophy, alternative medicine. He traveled, learned, healed, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't defined by a scoreboard. When he came back to the NFL, he wasn't chasing redemption. He was proving something deeper, that a man could return on his own terms without letting the league own his soul. They fined him, suspended him, branded him as unreliable. But Ricky never broke again. He played 6 more seasons, ran for over 10,000 yards, and retired with clarity. Something far rarer than a championship ring. Ricky Williams wasn't a failure. He was one of the first players to confront what the NFL refused to admit, that even the strongest men can't outrun themselves. He left not because he hated football, but because he loved himself enough to stop. That wasn't weakness. That was freedom. Segment 3, Steve McNair, the perfect life that wasn't. Steve McNair was the definition of strength. He played through injuries most men couldn't walk on, led broken teams to the playoffs, and carried himself with quiet command. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, he was steady, and that steadiness made him a hero. But strength has a cost when it becomes your only language. McNair lived in a world that praised toughness and punished vulnerability. He was built to endure, not express. So when the pressure grew, the injuries, the expectations, the loneliness, he didn't talk about it. He just kept moving forward. To his teammates, he was unshakable. To fans, he was flawless. To himself, he was fading. Every day, a little more disconnected from the peace he'd never learned how to find. By 2009, the physical pain had become constant, the emotional toll relentless. He carried the weight of being the provider, the image, the example, until he couldn't. When he died in that Nashville condo, the headlines told a story of scandal. But the truth was quieter and far more human. It was the story of a man who spent a lifetime being strong for everyone but himself. No one saw the signs, because that's how it usually happens. The ones who seem unbreakable are often the ones breaking in silence. They don't cry for help, they carry it, until the weight becomes too heavy to hide. Steve McNair's death wasn't just a tragedy, it was a reflection of what happens when strength becomes a prison. He was the model of control, but control can't heal pain. He was the image of composure, but composure can't quiet despair. He didn't fail, he just never felt safe enough to say, I need help. And in a sport that worships toughness, that silence can be fatal. Steve McNair gave the game everything. His body, his reputation, his peace. But what he needed most, football could never give him. Permission to be human. Segment 4, Chuck Hughes. The day the NFL watched a man die. October 24th, 1971. Detroit Lions versus Chicago Bears. Less than 2 minutes left in the game. The crowd was roaring, the air electric. And then silence. Chuck Hughes, wide receiver for the Lions, had just caught a pass. He jogged back toward the huddle, looked downfield, and collapsed. Face first, motionless. At first, everyone thought it was exhaustion, then a cramp, then something worse. Teammates waved frantically to the sideline. Trainers sprinted across the field. Moments later, paramedics. But nothing they did changed what was already happening. Chuck Hughes was dying. A 28-year-old husband and father, lying in front of 54,000 people, while the game clock kept running. They rushed him to the hospital. He never made it out alive. The official cause, a massive heart attack, brought on by an undiagnosed arterial blockage. The same heart that had carried him through every practice, every hit, every sprint, had simply given out. And yet, after the ambulance left the field, something almost unthinkable happened. The game continued. Players lined back up. Coaches called plays. The crowd, shaken but obedient, kept watching. Because that was football. The machine never stops, even when a man dies beneath its wheels. But Chuck Hughes wasn't a symbol. He was a son, a husband, a father of a little boy who would never see him come home again. He was the same as every player who's ever suited up, chasing a dream, believing that heart and willpower could outrun mortality. They couldn't. The league never talks about Chuck Hughes. There's no video package, no annual remembrance, no halftime tribute. Because his story isn't comfortable. It's not a comeback. It's not inspirational. It's the moment the NFL's illusion of invincibility cracked. Every player who steps onto a field knows that danger is part of the game. But that day in Detroit, they saw what that truly meant. Not a metaphor, not a warning, a man. Chuck Hughes deserves more than a footnote. He deserves remembrance, not for how he died, but for what his death revealed. That behind every uniform is a fragile, beating heart, and sometimes even that isn't enough to keep playing. Segment 5, Trent Williams. The cancer they tried to hide. Trent Williams was everything an NFL team could ask for. Disciplined, reliable, relentless. A wall of strength on the Washington offensive line, protecting quarterbacks, absorbing punishment, and never complaining. He was the kind of player franchises build around. Loyal, quiet, professional, and that loyalty almost killed him. For years, Williams trusted the team's medical staff. A small growth appeared on his scalp. Painful, strange, but supposedly harmless. He asked about it again and again. Each time the answer was the same. It's nothing serious. But the pain grew worse. And when he finally saw an independent doctor, the truth was devastating. It wasn't harmless. It was cancer. A rare and aggressive form that had gone untreated for years. He survived, but barely. By the time the tumor was removed, doctors told him he was lucky to be alive.
The tumor is attached to your skull, but the cancer, what it looks like on his scan, because it's like an older scan, looked like it already metastasized. But
Luck. That's what it came down to. Not care, not diligence. Luck. Williams confronted the franchise he'd given everything to. He had trusted them with his health, his body, his life, and they'd protected their image instead of their player. When he finally spoke out, it shattered what little faith fans still had in the Washington organization's culture. But for Williams, this wasn't about reputation. It was about betrayal. He had always been the quiet enforcer, the one who absorbed the hits so others didn't have to. Now the hits had come from within his own locker room. He learned that in the NFL, Loyalty is a one-way street. When you can play, they call you family. When you're broken, they call you replaceable. Trent Williams refused to stay silent. He sat out an entire season, not because of money, but because he refused to put his life back in the hands of people who had already gambled with it. Eventually, he was traded to San Francisco. A new start, a new team, and one of the greatest second acts in modern football. But his story never leaves the question behind. How many others are out there, still trusting, still hurting, still being told, you'll be fine? Trent Williams didn't just survive cancer. He exposed one of the darkest truths in the NFL, that sometimes the most dangerous hits come from the people who swear they're protecting you. He is alive today because he stopped believing them. Segment 6, Derek Thomas, born fast, died faster. Derek Thomas lived life in overdrive. On the field, he was pure velocity, a blur off the edge, a force quarterbacks feared before the ball was even snapped. 9 Pro Bowls, 126 sacks, and a reputation as one of the most explosive defenders in NFL history.
He's sacked by Derek Thomas.
That's as fast as I've seen a linebacker get to a quarterback in a long, long time.
Derek Thomas was the man. He shot out of nowhere.
But the same speed that made him unstoppable also made him vulnerable, because Derek Thomas didn't know how to slow down. Not in football, not in life. He came from hardship, raised by a single mother after his father, an Air Force pilot, was killed in Vietnam. That loss became his fire. Every game was a mission, every hit an act of defiance against the life that tried to hold him down. He wasn't just playing football, he was outrunning grief. Teammates loved him for his energy. Coaches admired his work ethic. But there was always that edge, a restlessness that never let him sit still. When he wasn't chasing quarterbacks, he was chasing the next thrill. Cars, speed, motion, momentum. Everything had to move fast or it wasn't worth doing. On January 23, 2000, that instinct caught up to him. Driving to the airport in icy conditions, Thomas lost control of his car. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt. The crash threw him from the vehicle. He was left paralyzed from the chest down. 2 weeks later, a blood clot ended his life. He was 33. For the football world, it was unthinkable. The great Derek Thomas, silenced not by an opponent, but by the same force that fueled him, speed. His death wasn't recklessness, it was inevitability. Because men like Derek Thomas only know how to live one way, forward. He left behind a legacy of greatness, but also a quiet lesson that few wanted to hear, that the same fire that drives men to glory can also consume them. We remember Derek Thomas for his sacks, his energy, his dominance. But what made him great was also what made him fragile. A heart that couldn't slow down long enough to rest. He lived like every moment was fourth and goal, and in the end, he left the world exactly as he lived in it, racing towards something just out of reach. Segment 7, Everson Walls, the teammate who gave up part of himself. Some stories in football aren't about power or fame, they're about love, the kind that survives the hits, the seasons, and the years after the lights go out. Everson Walls' story is one of those. Walls was a star in the 1980s, a ball hawk, a 3-time All-Pro, and one of the smartest defensive backs of his era. He intercepted passes with instinct, not speed, and led the league in picks 3 times. But his greatest moment didn't happen on a football field. It happened years after he retired, in a hospital beside a friend who was dying. Ron Springs had been his teammate with the Dallas Cowboys. A fullback, tough and loyal, the kind of man who gave everything to the people around him. After football, Springs developed diabetes. Complications from the disease left him paralyzed, his kidneys failing, his life fading. Doctors told him he needed a transplant. The odds of finding a match were slim. Everson Walls didn't hesitate. He got tested quietly and found out he was a match. No hesitation, no press conference, just a decision. He gave his kidney to save Ron Springs' life. It wasn't for recognition. It wasn't for legacy. It was for friendship, the kind forged in sweat, in pain, in shared struggle. When the game was long gone and the fame had faded, that bond remained. The surgery worked. Springs lived for several more years, able to spend time with his family, his son, his teammates. He often said that Walls didn't just save his life, he gave him back his dignity. Everson Walls never saw it as heroic. He said it was simple. You take care of your teammate. That's what football's supposed to mean. Not contracts, not endorsements, not the highlight reels that fade by Monday morning. It's the people, the men who share the grind, the hurt, the dreams, and sometimes the recovery. Walls' act wasn't loud, it didn't trend. But in a sport built on collisions, it was the rare moment of quiet grace, a reminder that brotherhood doesn't end when the pads come off. Everson Walls didn't just give a kidney, he gave proof that even in a brutal game, humanity can still win. Segment 8, Chris Henry, the receiver who lost control. Chris Henry's story began like so many others. Talent, redemption, and a chance to prove he changed. He was the quiet one in a loud locker room, a deep threat with rare speed and soft hands. When he stepped on the field for Cincinnati, it looked like he'd finally found balance. But balance isn't easy when the world only remembers your mistakes. Early in his career, Henry struggled. Arrests, suspensions, bad decisions that painted him as another wasted talent. But what few people saw was the effort to come back from it. By 2009, he'd rebuilt his life. He was engaged, a father, talking openly about his past and how much he wanted to do better. Teammates said he was different. He smiled more. He talked about the future. He was trying, really trying. Then one December afternoon, it all ended. A fight with his fiancée turned into something no one could undo. She drove off in a pickup truck. Henry jumped onto the back, shouting, trying to stop her from leaving. Moments later, he fell from the moving truck. He died on the side of the road at 26 years old. The headlines called it tragedy, but they never asked why. Because what came next changed how we understood everything that had happened to him. When doctors examined his brain, they found something no one expected. Signs of advanced CTE, a disease linked to years of head trauma, discovered in a man barely out of his 20s. That changed his story. It wasn't just recklessness, it was injury. It wasn't rage, it was damage. The same game that gave him purpose had been quietly rewiring his mind, making him a stranger to himself. Chris Henry wasn't a villain. He was a young man trying to make peace with a brain that wouldn't let him. Trying to live right, to be better, while fighting something no one could see. And maybe that's what makes his story so painful. Because we'll never know who he might have become if someone had noticed, if the science had come sooner, if the league had looked deeper. Chris Henry's death was the kind of tragedy that forces silence. Not because it's shocking, but because it's real. It reminds us that behind every helmet, behind every highlight, there's a fragile mind trying to hold everything together. He wasn't perfect. He wasn't evil. He was human. And he deserved more time to prove it. If you want more stories of NFL greatness and heart, hit subscribe, drop a like, and stick around. The next chapter of football history is already waiting.